Hello everyone and welcome to SFF180 and the 11th installment of the 12 Days of Halloween. Tonight, a teenage girl belonging to a snake-handling church in a small Appalachian town becomes the conduit for an ancient subterranean evil in Beneath. Thank you all for joining me once again. Thomas here, your host, as always. If there's anything out there in horror fiction that's low-hanging fruit, it's religious fanaticism. Not to say that that isn't a worthy subject for the genre's critical eye, but you won't find any shortage of stories in which absolute evil is personified by some tyrannical preacher or oppressive cult. Now, some of these are done quite well, others not so much, but I don't think I've quite read a story that puts religious fanaticism in the crosshairs quite like Beneath, a messy but undeniably hallucinogenic debut novel by Kristi DeMeester. It's 1988 in this novel, and I begin to get the sense that more and more horror writers are probably going to be turning this into a trope. After all, if you need a story that puts characters in a setting that isolates them from the outside world and yet feels just modern enough to remain relatable, set it in a time frame just before the advent of the internet and cell phones. Cora Mayburn is a young Alabama journalist assigned to drive out to the Appalachian village of Hensley, North Carolina to do a piece on a bunch of snake handlers. Now, these are churches that take quite literally the scripture that if your faith is strong enough, even the most venomous serpents will fear to strike you. Yeah, a quick glance at Google will show you that this is a sales pitch that could do with a little refining. Cora is reluctant to take the job because the very thought of churches triggers the living hell out of childhood memories of her own abuse at the hands of a pedophile pastor. You will see this subject crop up quite often in this story, so if you think it might cross a line for you, just move along then. Nothing to see here. And besides, I think we can all agree that the snakes as phallic symbols of evil temptation thing was already a bit cliche in the book of Genesis. But I have to say, somebody probably had to write the horror novel that expressly targets the idea promulgated by fundamentalist patriarchal religions the world over, whether they're Christian, Muslim, or whatever, that women's sexuality is a corrosive, evil influence, tempting men away from their godliness and higher moral calling. I mean, you even see these attitudes hold a lot of currency in the secular world whenever women make allegations of sexual assault. And the first question out of anybody's mouths is, well, what did she ever do to lead the guy on? Which is a suspicion people have that even a victim being a child or adolescent doesn't protect them from. So much of the horror in Beneath, then, is expressly sexual, the demonic entity that comes to possess the town of Hensley, targeting its initial victims via the budding sexuality of teenage girls. Cora goes to Hensley despite her misgivings, expecting nothing more than a routine story about backwoods fanatics, and almost immediately finds herself hurled into a phantasmagoria of weird horror. Local teenager Leah McDowell has what you might consider a fairly normal teenage crush on charismatic young pastor Michael Wayne, but what's less excusable is that those lustful feelings are mutual, though Wayne has never acted upon his attractions, but his obvious desire for the girl is readily apparent to Cora, which fills her with loathing for the man. Leah has been recently bitten by one of the church's snakes, surprising everyone by not being affected at all by its venom, but she now appears to be possessed in some way by an entity from deep underground calling itself the Great Worm. She wanders the woods, where her mere passage kills every animal in sight, and then resurrects them, and soon she offers up her own mother as sacrifice. Cora teams up with Pastor Wayne, despite hating his guts, to fight the evil that's taken Leah and is in the process of taking the town. Once DeMeester is finally warmed up, she shifts right into batshit crazy, hurling readers through scenes of strange waking nightmares and back into reality with such wild abandon you can't always be sure which is which. It's actually effective if the goal, after all, is to be disorienting. The best thing about DeMeester's writing is the enthusiasm with which she turns every horror moment into a set piece. Even a stop at a roadside diner hours away from town finds Cora and Wayne confronted with the knowledge that the evil that pursues them will allow no easy escape. It's the kitchen sink approach. The book even eventually throws in a Necronomicon-ish evil tome. Now, I won't say I found much of this especially scary, but no novel this buck wild isn't going to hold my attention. Still, hand in hand with the author's chutzpah in offering up grotesque deaths and horrific perversions of all kinds, is some problematic character development and a lack of discipline in her novel's structure that has her characters doing redundant and sometimes illogical things. There's often way too much expository dialogue, especially in early chapters establishing the narrative. I couldn't exactly believe that taking the assignment to write about this church was the sort of thing Cora would need to keep her journalism career from flatlining, as her editor tells her. And Cora's willingness to work with Wayne felt motivated by little more than the needs of the plot, considering how Wayne represents to Cora the ultimate trauma of her own childhood, and her knowledge that literally anywhere men like her assailant exist, even the ones who are able to keep their urges under control. And finally, the book's ending is a bit deflating, offering what feels like an easy out when it should have bared its fangs and gone right for our throats. So while I can't say Beneath works consistently, or for that matter, even makes a half-hearted stab at consistency, it's also not one I'm likely to forget anytime soon. There are enough moments of dark imaginative power and straight-up weirdness to convince me that Kristi DeMeester will be a writer worth following, if only because she has no hesitation in leading us to the most hellish nightmares she can dig up from deep underground. And that's all I got for this episode of SFF180, everybody. Thank you once again for joining me. Remember, the most important thing, these are reviews. You will not always agree with me, but if you enjoyed watching, hit that like button, share the video far and wide with all of your SFF reading friends, and above all, please subscribe. If you haven't done so, that is how SFF180 grows as a channel. You can also support the channel at my TeePublic store and at my Patreon, where recruits into Wink's Army for $2 a month get little perks like getting to see some of the videos early, things like that. So I want to thank all those people for their awesome support. I want to thank you for being equally awesome viewers. And remember, I will see you tomorrow night at midnight for the next installment of The 12 Days of Halloween.